are living in a computer-programmed reality, and the only clue we have to it is when some variable is changed and some alteration in our reality occurs. We would have the overwhelming impression that we were reliving the present, déjà vu, perhaps in precisely the same way, hearing the same words, saying the same words. I submit that these impressions are valid and significant, and I will even say this: such an impression is a clue that at some past time point, a variable was changed, reprogrammed as it were, and that because of this, an alternative world branched off.
Good afternoon and welcome to another edition of Free Association Radio. I'm Robert Phoenix, and I'm glad that you can be a part of the next 90 minutes or so as we blast through the airwaves and try to understand what the hell's going on in the reality matrix we called life in three-dimensional terms. We're in a kind of an amazing time in a lot of ways. I mean, on the one hand, there are events that are so surreal. Like we are just in kind of another zone with the circus and the sideshow. I'm going to talk about just the outward manifestations of this and what it looked like from my perspective and my point of view from watching the Republican National Convention through a particular lens. And I have to admit that it's a fairly skewed lens, but I was watching a lot of this go down through Infowars and Alex Jones. And Alex Jones is an interesting character on a lot of different levels. Number one, I think Alex is incredibly bright, if it is indeed Alex Jones to begin with, because there's a very good chance that Alex Jones may not even be Alex Jones. So you might be asking, well, what's he talking about? What's Robert going on about? There's this theory that Alex Jones is actually Bill Hicks. And as a theory, it is not too far-fetched. And let me tell you why. First of all, if you don't know who Bill Hicks was, he was a stand-up comic. He was born in Houston and cut his teeth comedically in Houston, in Austin, and in Dallas, going back and forth between the three places, various clubs. There were a lot of comics at that time. It was, the 1980s was the time where comics were, popping up right and left. And Johnny Carson, and then after that, Jay Leno, to a large extent, was making comics. If you made it to Carson, you were pretty much in. And if you weren't on Carson, then that was your, that's where you needed to get to. That was your mecca. And I lived in San Francisco during the 80s, and that was the time of people like Dana Carvey and Robin Williams, just to name a few. I went to college with Greg Proops. I knew Greg a little bit. Some of you may be familiar with Greg and his work with Whose Line Is It? And he was very, very close to Drew Carey and Ryan from the Drew Carey Show. So, it was the whole comedic scene in San Francisco was just exploding. And it wasn't just San Francisco. There were comedians from Boston and New York, and Texas had its own version of it. And out of Texas, you get people like Bill Hicks and Sam Kinison. There are others, but these were the two comics that really, kind of rose to the top. And there's a documentary on Netflix about Bill Hicks, which was produced by Kevin Booth. And Kevin Booth is an interesting character in that he connects both Bill Hicks and Alex Jones. And he went from essentially being Bill Hicks's best friend growing up. And their connections with Kevin Booth and NASA and some very interesting governmental agencies through Kevin's father. And I believe Bill's father might have worked for NASA too, if I'm not mistaken. Now, what happens is that there's this amazing kind of confluence of events where Bill Hicks is leaving the planet, right? I mean, he has been diagnosed with cancer, and he's growing facial hair, and he's looking very different in a lot of ways. He's lost weight. One could make a case that he did indeed have cancer. Hicks was a notorious smoker. He was a drinker for a long time. He stopped drinking, and once he stopped drinking, he got his comedy back together. Hicks is a Sagittarius by his astrological assignation. And Bill started to move more and more into politics. He always had a slightly political stamp to his comedy. And he was great. He was acerbic. He was not a nice guy. To be successful though, there's almost like a blueprint where you kind of have to be an asshole in some ways. Not in every case, but in many cases. So Bill is getting more and more political, and his last stand really is at Waco and the Branch Davidians. Now here's where Alex comes into play. Here's where Alex makes his entrance. It's at Waco and the Branch Davidians. So you have this very unusual confluence of the two sort of intersecting in time and space. And then Hicks goes away. Hicks dies. But what's interesting about Bill Hicks is that nobody went to his funeral. It was private, closed casket. And I've talked to Bill Hicks's mother, by the way. I want to be on record that I talked with Bill Hicks's mother. And this was back when I was in the music business, and I saw that Bill had a bunch of recordings and live stuff on his websites, which was Sacred Cow Productions, which, by the way, Kevin Booth is in charge of. And another, sort of spoke in the Sacred Cow universe happens to be Joe Rogan. So I talked with, I think it's not Esther Hicks. Esther Hicks is, what's his name? Abraham. I talked with her too one time, by the way. So I've talked with a couple of Mrs. Hickses in this lifetime. I had very different conversations with both. I did talk to her. I talked about Bill's stuff, and she told me that Ryko Disc pretty much had a contract with her, and she wouldn't be able to get out of it. But boy, I was really interested in grabbing, whatever I could from Bill's catalog. So Bill Hicks goes away. Alex Jones enters the scene. Alex Jones, the son of a dentist. The son of a dentist, apparently. There are old videos of Alex Jones that are on the internet, and that it's really interesting to look at that version of Alex Jones, because the young Alex Jones doesn't bear a whole lot of resemblance to the current day version of Alex Jones. The other thing about Alex Jones is, if you look at his birth date, it says 1974. 1974. So Alex Jones, technically speaking, is 14 years younger than me. And he looks 14. He doesn't look 14 years older than me, but I would say that he looks, at the very least, to be my contemporary, if not older. And I brought this up with certain people, and they said, well, it's just all the stress and the hard living. Okay, fine, I'll give that to you. But if you look at the forensics between Alex Jones and Bill Hicks, they are incredibly similar. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because I played with this years ago. Like, I looked at this back in 2011. So we're talking, 5 years ago. But I've been watching a lot of InfoWars lately, which I haven't done really ever. And I have seen certain expressions that Alex Jones has that are incredibly Bill Hicks-like. Now, you could say, well, maybe he's watched a lot of Bill Hicks' comedy. Perhaps. But there's something there between these two characters. Now, if it's true that there was an Alex Jones, and I believe that there was an Alex Jones, Alex Emmerich Jones, he's got a high school yearbook photo and all that stuff. People have looked into this. But perhaps that Alex Jones is somewhere else. Perhaps he's got some other identity. Perhaps he's taken up another cause. And that Alex Jones was in reality replaced by Bill Hicks as part of a program here to create a wing of, at times, disinformation. And that Alex Jones is really nothing more than a gatekeeper. But he's a very talented gatekeeper. If that's the case, my big issue with Alex Jones is that Alex has never, ever, ever once indicted the neocons, the Zionists, the nation state of Israel. He stays as far away from that as possible. Now, I understand it. It could be professional suicide, so he'll talk about these people in vague terms like globalists or bankers or the elites. Maybe that's code. I get it. But it's nothing. But he's so quick to pounce on the Islamophobic meme. So quick. But he doesn't really understand who's behind it or who's promoting it and who benefits from it. In fact, he shies away from it. And I watched him. I watched a number of videos of Alex at the Republican National Convention. And his job was to be a shit disturber. A shit disturber. And he's done a very good job of it. He went there, he riled up the communists, they got into a fight with the communists. He went onto the set of the Young Turks. He managed to run into Karl Rove at the airport twice. How does that happen? Just manages to run into Charlie Rose, just manages to run into Van Jones. So Alex he played the role of stirring the pot at the Republican National Convention. This is exactly what he's done. And he held up when he was on the set of the Young Turks, he held up a T-shirt that said "rape" and Bill Clinton's photo, his picture on it. It was like hope with Obama, but of course a slightly different message. Anyway, I'm just throwing it out there because I've been thinking about this Alex Jones-Bill Hicks piece for quite a while. And I'd be curious to see how other people think about this. And there are other folks who, Dave McGowan, I believe, was somebody who actually entertained the idea that Alex was Bill Hicks. I'm not alone in this. Now, it's a rabbit hole. We may never get to the bottom of the rabbit hole, but there's so much mystery. There's so much synchronicity. There's so much weird overlapping kind of content and people. Kevin Booth being the connector, because Kevin is Alex's producer. Kevin does all the InfoWars stuff, and Kevin did all of Bill Hicks' stuff. It's fascinating, isn't it? Absolutely fascinating. So what's been happening at the Republican convention? Well, we've seen the Trump family front and center. Donald Jr., even though I didn't watch his speech, apparently it was, a game changer. There are polls that have come out that people that were on the fence, who were not sure about where they were going to vote, now they've been moved over into the Trump camp because Don Jr. hit that Pluto and Libra notes, the fair and balanced notes. And then, of course, there's Ivanka, who is a superstar, an absolute superstar. And she came out and she knocked it out of the park and kind of cemented the fact that, there is a strong female presence in Trump's life coming from his daughter. Now, that makes up for the weird snafu around Melania, who I think might be a robot, by the way. I think we could make a case for Melania being one of these Eastern European robotoids that they talk about, the difference between being the robotoid and the clone. And I think she might be, Melania 3000. And it doesn't surprise me that, parts of her speech were written for her by somebody else who were copying parts of the speech by Michelle Obama. By the way, plagiarism, it happens all the time. And I'm not giving Melania a pass or Trump's people a pass. Not at all. Not in the least. But plagiarism happens all the time. Led Zeppelin plagiarized Stairway to Heaven. Did they make it a better song? I mean, there was a guy running around the East Village, New York City, playing a version of it. In my estimation, Led Zeppelin probably made it a better song. And would we have ever heard that version of Stairway to Heaven had Led Zeppelin not made that song? The answer is no. Another case in point, Martin Luther King. He totally plagiarized the I Have a Dream speech. Look it up. Totally plagiarized it. Somebody else wrote it, or parts of it. Now, it's a great speech. Clearly, it's one of the greatest speeches in American history, maybe even the world. But are we going to hear that speech if Martin Luther King doesn't plagiarize it? The answer is no, because he had the platform. Whether or not you believe that if in his platform as being genuine, and I do not, by the way, I do not believe that Martin Luther King's platform was genuine. Martin Luther King was a made man. Rosa Parks was a made woman. I've gotten into this before on my show. I talk about the Outlander School, which was in Tennessee, which was this school that was created basically to school Americans, both black and white, on socialism and communism. And MLK and Rosa Parks both went to that school. Martin Luther King was created. He was created by the socialists. And when I talk about socialists, I'm using the social Marxists that come out of Chicago. Chicago is a trip, by the way. I mean, if you look at Chicago, there is so much shit that has gone on in Chicago. It is a vortex. I think Chicago is the Jerusalem of the United States. I really do. I mean, let's just look at this from a phenomenological perspective, okay? Let's go back. We have the Great Fire. We have the Great Fire of Chicago. There was a fire in San Francisco because of the earthquake, but we have this, bullshit story of Mrs. O'Malley's cow or whatever knocking over the lantern and setting the city on fire. That's not true at all. The city was set on fire because there was a lot of money to be made in insurance. The Great Fire of Chicago was an insurance scam, and a deadly one. And also, if we get into this whole kind of, operation of ritual sacrifice and occult sacrifice, what element do they use? Fire. Okay, so here we have literally Chicago fire as ritual sacrifice. Now, what else happens in Chicago? Well, we have the underworld, right? We have the underworld. It is the birth of the underworld. Sure, there were gangs in New York. Of course there were. You have people like Sam Giancana that come out of New York. You've got your Lucky Lucianos, Meyer Lansky's, the Jewish Mafia. But when we really think of crime in the underworld, what do we think of? We think of Chicago. We think of Al Capone and all these other mobsters that are really fine-tuning this whole notion of a crime syndicate and being able to put their hands and fingers into just about any pie they want. Now, who also comes from Chicago? Saul Alinsky. Saul Alinsky comes from Chicago. And who does Saul Alinsky really learn from? Where does he learn his psychological tactics from? He learns them from Al Capone. Saul Alinsky had many a conversation with Al Capone. Alinsky had a degree in criminal justice. He's not a lawyer. He was into forensics and understanding the pathological mind. So now we have Saul Alinsky coming out of Chicago. Who was born in Chicago? Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton was born in Chicago. And who does she study with? She studies with Saul Alinsky. There are love letters. Love letters from Hillary Clinton to Saul Alinsky. Scorpio to Aquarius. The eagle and the serpent. Guess what else starts in Chicago? It's the birth of the American version of Islam. The Nation of Islam has its roots in the Black Moorish sciences. And the first Black Moorish science college and group happens where? Chicago. And out of that group spins Elijah Muhammad and the Nation of Islam. It all comes out of Chicago. Where's Oprah Winfrey from? Chicago. She has an amazing network, a channel, right? Self-worth. Not just self-worth, we're talking financial worth in the billions. Now, she was born, she wasn't born in Chicago, but that's where she migrates to, and that's where she makes her fortune. Is in Chicago. Where's Bill Ayers from? Chicago. The guy who's literally running. He's running kind of, I think, Black Lives Matter. Now, they're getting money from Soros and the Open Society and the Tides Foundation. They got that magic $33 million. But who's really running Black Lives Matter? I can tell you right now, it's Bill Ayers. Bill Ayers has been behind the Common Core education. Bill Ayers is part of the Weather Underground, a radical group based out of where? Chicago. Who's one of the big backers of Barack Obama? Penny Pritzker. What is Penny Pritzker connected to? She's connected to the Hyatt Hotels. Where is she based out of? Chicago. That's where Obama's money comes from. Big money, Penny Pritzker, or Peggy Pritzker, whatever her name is, the Pritzker family. Chicago. Where does Barack Obama get turned out? Chicago. He goes to Chicago. He hangs out with Bill Ayers. He hangs out with Frank Marshall Davis, who is from Chicago. Isn't this interesting? It's really fascinating. I'll give you a little inside information. It's amazing what you'll, experience or get turned on to when you go to a bar sometime. So last week, I was at this watering hole by my house called Jack Allen's. I've talked about Jack Allen's. It's a nice restaurant. I go there, especially during the summertime when it's hot. I get out on the patio. have myself a nice, cold, gluten-free beer. It's a simple pleasure. Sometimes I have 2 or 3. So I'm sitting down next to this woman and this guy. And this woman is really kind of showing me a lot of attention. I was a little uncomfortable, to be honest with you, because she was showing me so much attention. And then it's really rare. I found out that she was a triple Capricorn. Now, most times, people don't know their signs, or they know their signs, they don't know their rising signs. She knew all 3, triple Capricorn. And she was from Chicago. Okay? She lived in Chicago, wasn't born there, but lived there. And she was really good friends, and still is to this day, with a woman by the name of Jerry Ryan. Now, Ryan was not her last name. It was her name she took up because she married a guy by the name of Jack Ryan. And Jerry Ryan, you'll probably remember her from Star Trek. She played 7 of 9 in Star Trek. Chicago, right? So she marries this guy, Jack Ryan, who is a congressman, a senator. He's a senator from Illinois. And he's a Republican, he's good looking, and, big, and runs on the family value stuff. Anyway, Jerry Ryan marries him, and he takes her to these sex parties. And this is public knowledge, by the way, because it came out in Jerry Ryan's divorce settlement, and it was published in the Chicago Tribune. Now, this is supposed to be under lock and key, this information. But it got out, and they published it in the newspaper while Jack Ryan is running against one Barack Obama. Now, if you know anything about Obama, he lost his first election. He lost it to a woman, a fellow Democrat. And what they did is through Acorn is they basically rigged the votes, rigged a recount, redistricted voting recount, and she was out and Obama was in. He didn't win. So now he's in, I guess he's like an alderman or whatever they call that kind of person in Chicago. And it doesn't take him long to run for Senate. And he's going to go up against this Jack Ryan character. Well, then they spilled the beans on Jack Ryan and his little eyes wide shut escapades. So this woman tells me that the reason why Jerry Ryan, to these parties is because he was a closet homosexual. He was gay. And she was a beard, which is really the reason why she divorced him. Because he had no interest in being with her. And this is what I found out at the bar. I'm just telling you this because what happens then is he steps down, he can't be in the race, he can't be Mr. Family Values guy. So he's got to, step aside. Obama has a clear path to being elected. Clear path. And where's Obama from? Of course, Chicago. Michael Jordan, Chicago Bulls, had that great run in the 80s and the 90s. There was so much controversy surrounding Michael Jordan and his gambling and his debts. It was so bad that the commissioner of the NBA told Michael Jordan to go sit out for a while. And Michael Jordan, at the height of his career, says, I'm going to retire and I'm going to go play baseball. What a nice fairy tale that was. Michael Jordan was told to step away because he had so much heat on him. And oh, by the way, Michael Jordan's father was murdered driving through the South. Very suspicious circumstances. kids that were involved, probably patsies, and the murder was, in my estimation, a gambling. It was a gambling debt. I think they were sending a message to Michael Jordan. Might have also been an illuminated sacrifice. Michael Jordan's a made man. He owns an NBA franchise. Didn't really have to do anything for it. It was pretty much handed to him. And he's got some money. But again, where is he from? He's from Chicago. Who's the mayor of Chicago? Rahm Emanuel. What city, who by the way said never let a good crisis go to waste, what city leads the nation in the murder rate? Chicago. What team is jinxed more than any other team? The Chicago Cubs. Why? Because a guy brought his goat onto the field and the Cubs told him he couldn't do it. So he put a curse on the Cubs. So we have this goat curse, this curse of Baphomet on the Cubs. And then what happens during the playoffs against the Miami Marlins, the Florida Marlins? They lose. They lose on a foul ball. And under such bizarre circumstances. And so this curse of the goats happens again. It's Chicago. Something, I'm trying to make a case here for a city that is unlike any other city in the United States. Unlike any other city. It's a vortex. Chicago is a vortex. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, you've got Lake Michigan right there at the edge of Chicago. This is a city that needs a lot more thorough examination. When I was hanging out with Gordon Davidson, some of you may know who Gordon Davidson is, you may not. Gordon Davidson and Corrine McLaughlin are one of the leading Luciferic couples in the country. And I met Gordon when I was staying at this community in Massachusetts called Sirius, Sirius. And Gordon and Corrine started Sirius. They'd been to Findhorn. And I actually really liked Gordon when I was hanging around with him for this 1 month that I was there. I found him to be funny, smart, kind of puckish. Gordon worked for Alice Bailey in the Lucis Trust for a long time. So he's got a lot of esoteric information, but at his core, he's a Luciferian. And he believes in Alice Bailey's version and vision of the world in a new age, in a new world order. This is what Gordon and Corrine are selling. But Gordon told me about the various cities in the United States that represented chakras. LA was the 5th chakra of the country. It's the throat chakra. And that New York is the 3rd chakra of the country, power, right? New Orleans was the root chakra, or the 2nd chakra, not the root chakra, but the sex chakra of the country. And that the heart chakra is Chicago because it represents the heartland, right? It's the middle of America, heart being located in the middle of the upper torso, depending upon which version you're looking at, whether it's pre-Mandela effect or post-Mandela effect. So there you go. There's Chicago, the heart. It is and with all of the deaths in Chicago, the black on black death and crime, it is the bleeding heart of Chicago. The guy who was killed in Benghazi, the American attaché in Benghazi, was from Chicago. How about that? How about them apples? And you've seen the pictures of him being sacrificed almost like he's He's Jesus there in Benghazi. It's just an amazing kind of vortex that has created these characters that have shaped the 20th and the 21st century in ways that we can't even begin to comprehend. You take one of them out of the mix, just one of them out of the mix, and we're in a different vector. You take Bill Ayers out of the mix, we're in a different vector. You take Oprah out of the mix, we're in a different vector. You put them all together, and what do we have? We have the maelstrom of our current paradigm. It's been birthed out of Chicago, not Los Angeles. Los Angeles is the transmission of the dream, not New York. New York is the story of success, and it is the bastion of money. It is Chicago. It is the second city. Look at Second City TV. Look at all the people that came through Second City TV or the Second City Comedy Group. Let's talk about them for a moment. Bill Murray, John Candy. Basically, most of the cast of the first Saturday Night Live and a lot of other people that followed them. Lorne Michaels. I mean, these are all, Second City people who now have their, Dan Aykroyd, they now have their fingerprints all over modern culture. Spoofing, satirizing, shaping, twisting, memeing. There you go. Here's your Chicago roots again. And by the way, let's not forget the band Chicago. On second thought, let's forget them. Chicago has some fairly forgettable bands. Let's be clear about that. Styx, forget them. Forget them. Industrial music, industrial rock, where does it come from? It comes from Chicago. Trent Reznor, Al Jorgensen, Ministry, Wax Trax, that hard jackhammer sound. All Chicago. The blues, Chicago. See the pattern here? It might be the most important American city, bar none. It might be one of the most influential cities in the world. Because you got these guys playing the Chicago-style blues, right? Howlin' Wolf, Muddy Waters. I mean, they're all passing through Chicago at some point in time. And who's listening to that music? Eric Clapton, Jimmy Page, Jeff Beck, Keith Richards, Mick Jagger. So now you've got that music literally leaping across the Atlantic and starting the British invasion and kind of the birth of modern rock and roll as we know it. Everything before then is kind of this American version of rock and roll. It doesn't have the same edge that the British sort of apply to it. And where do those guys come from? Chicago. Of course, they have the roots in places like Mississippi and Alabama, Arkansas, Georgia, Texas, but they migrate. They migrate to Chicago. Fascinating, absolutely fascinating city, and I think as important as a vortex as places like Athens, Jerusalem, Machu Picchu, it's Chicago. And to this day, it is still pulsing and pumping its version of reality into this version of the Matrix. Now, if Chicago is the heart chakra of the country, let's just say Gordon is correct, then it would make sense in some ways that socialism and communism would really have its roots deeply entrenched in Chicago, because it does. It absolutely does. And to some extent, this is where people align with socialism and communism. They can become very passionate about it They can become very heartfelt about it. There's a really interesting clip on Infowars. There were these guys that attacked Alex Jones. Alex Jones instigated the whole thing. He's a shit disturber. Alex Jones reminds me of the character that Broderick Crawford played in All the King's Men. You should watch that movie if you haven't seen it. And you'll understand what I'm talking about, All the King's Men. There's another film with Andy Griffith called A Voice in the Crowd, very similar, about populist orators who become incredibly powerful. And this is the model for Alex Jones in many ways. But anyway, he's there and he's instigating a lot of shit. And he gets involved with these young communists. And they kind of get into a fight. And it's on Infowars, it's on YouTube, you can watch it. And then they catch up with these young communists later. And this guy, I will give it to him, he is passionate. He is absolutely passionate about his ideology. Absolutely passionate about his ideology. He's waving a red flag, United Workers of the World, and he's quoting Marx chapter and verse. He knows Das Kapital backwards and forwards and backwards. He's got it. I admire his passion. I admire his desire to be as intellectually and ideologically as fervent as he can be. I think he's wrong. He'll tell me I'm wrong for all the reasons that I think he's wrong. But where is he coming from? He's coming from his heart because he totally believes in this version of their system. And where does it come from? It comes from Chicago. So if we can understand that this version of social Marxism, which comes out of Chicago, is infused and overlaid with the heart chakra of the United States, then we can see why people so fervently believe in it as an ideology and a system. And one has to ask themselves, is this a mistake? Is this just some kind of coincidence? A lucky mistake? Is this just some kind of coincidence? Or are these people gravitating towards Chicago because they know that they can get to the heart of something, that they can tap into this pulsating, sort of pounding, etheric sense of flesh and blood and impassioned inspiration with people? Is it a coincidence? Or is it the fact that this place, situated on a lake, and look, I'm just having a superficial rendering of Chicago. If I had a day to research Chicago, I could completely untangle even more pieces here. But perhaps there is a reason. There is a reason why these people either come to Chicago or are brought to Chicago so that they can expand their empire and their idea and have a populist connection with whatever it is that's emanating from that place. I think it's interesting. And I think it's probably the most important, powerful, and interesting city right now in the world in terms of its saturation of culture in what we're going through. Bar none. Bar none. By the way, also, on the identity tip, has anybody ever seen Eric Holder and Stedman Graham in the same room together? Whatever happened to that Stedman character? Once Eric Holder assumed office, Stedman went away. Right? Remember, Stedman was connected to Oprah. He was Oprah's beard for a long time because, Oprah's really gay and Gail's really her lover. And who gives a shit? I don't give a shit. That's what she wants. I don't care. But it's deceptive. It's totally deceptive. I think Eric Holder was Stedman Graham. I think Stedman Graham is just some kind of character that Eric Holder played. These people are interchangeable, right? They're interchangeable. They get swapped out. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to play a little bit of music, and I'm going to read an article that was penned by Robert Morrow, not Robert Morris, but Robert Morrow, who happens to live in Austin, Texas, of all places. I've asked this guy, Robert Morrow, to be on my show. He's an interesting character. He ran to be basically the head of the Republican Party in Austin, and nobody ran against him. He ran unopposed because Austin is, democratic and blue through and through. And once he was elected, he started to talk about shit, the stuff that we talk about. And all of a sudden, the Republicans wanted nothing to do with him. And they've been trying to get him out. I don't know if he's still the head of the Republican Party here because he won. It was a fair election. But he just put together an article that I'm going to read. Yes, he's the chairman of Travis County Republican Party. He's still that. And I'm going to read this article, and it has to do with Donald Trump and some of these accusations of rape that are starting to surface around Trump. And we're going to talk about that in the next part of the show. But until then, why don't we play just a little bit of music? Now, I got to be careful now because the music, the shows are going up on YouTube, by the way. And I want to thank Erica for that. The shows are going up on YouTube. So I've got to be really careful now about songs because YouTube will scan the music and they'll tell me to pull something down. So why don't I play something from my music catalog, which I haven't played in a long time because I own it. And make no mistake about it, this is my piece of music, and it is called Quarantine. Quarantine. And I did this. I made this piece of music probably in 2007. So it's about, what are we talking, 9 years old now. And what I was envisioning was at that time really intense, kind of radicalized young Muslims. And I was not into the Muslim thing, but I could feel it, right? And I wanted to create this kind of angry song that transmitted this feeling I was picking up. So one could say that I was about 9 years ahead of my time. Here's Quarantine or Quarantine. How about that? Quarantine. 4 minutes and 43 seconds. You're listening to, well, that one ends a little abruptly, doesn't it? That is Quarantine or Quarantine. Who would have known that back in 2008, when I was making this music, that we would really be talking about quarantining quarantines. All right. Anyway, let's get back to the proceedings here. You're listening to the Friday FARcast. I'm Robert Phoenix, and we've been riffing a bit on Chicago. And I found that there are 3 days that are important in the sort of the numerological and the astrological evolution of Chicago. And the first day is August 12th, 1833. And that's when the town of Chicago is organized, quote unquote organized. whatever that means. And then there was about 200 people there in 1833. Think about that. In 1833, there were 200 people in Chicago. Excuse me. Then on June 15th, 1835, the first public land sales commenced. And the guy that was in charge of that was Edmund Dick Taylor. So we got a little dash Gemini, start off with a little Leo, little dash of Gemini, and then Chicago is incorporated on Saturday, March 4th, 1837. So it is a Piscean city, a Piscean city. So let's just see if we can punch up the astrological chart of Chicago. I'm curious. I'm very curious. Let's see what we got here. Here we go. Astro theme, favorite site when it comes for hunting down charts. So this is the August, they've got an August 17th date here for Chicago, which is 1803, 1:28 p.m. So it is a Leo city based on this date with a 0-degree Sagittarian ascendant, which is almost right in a line with Hillary Clinton's chart. It's very, very close. Hillary Clinton. Yeah, it's Hillary Clinton. Feels weird to say that name. Hillary Rodham Clinton. Her chart aligns very closely to Chicago. Because she is a 24 degrees rising Scorpio, which means her first house has Jupiter in Sagittarius 1 degree, her first house. So Hillary Clinton's Jupiter is right on Chicago's ascendant. Boy, what a fortuitous place. She should live in Chicago. The midheaven there is Virgo, Saturn in Virgo, Mars in Virgo. Got a lot of Leo, Moon in Leo, Mercury in Leo, Venus in Leo, Sun in Leo. Down at the bottom of the chart, there's the true node in Aquarius, 23 degrees. Saul Alinsky, the Aquarian, right down there in the true node. In the third house, where Aquarian ideas are promulgated and spewed out into the world, right? And, we get all of our isms with Aquarius. Socialism, communism, fascism, all the isms are Aquarian. They're ideologies. Aquarius is the ruler of ideologies, primarily communist ideologies. But it's true. So here we go. Chiron in Sagittarius, 26 degrees. So the city of Chicago is going to have a Saturn-Chiron conjunction here at the end of next year. That'll be very interesting. I'd have to spend some time with that. Not a lot of aspects. Everything is either in sextile or semi-sextile. It is a classic bucket chart, and the buckets or the outcome, the outflow of the bucket is what? It is Pluto. Is that right? Yes, indeed, it is Pluto. Pluto in Pisces. Pluto in Pisces. Interesting. Down in the fourth house, the heartland. Okay, let's skip topics here. I don't want to get too far afield and get too buried into the astrological chart of Chicago. I might lose some of you. What I want to do is I want to read this story, and we have to take into account and consideration that I believe at this point in time we're either going to have a Trump presidency or we're going to have an Obama stay. It's going to be one of the two. I think Hillary's going to be taken out of this mix now, and I'll tell you why. I think that Donald Trump picked Mike Pence specifically because Pence is so deeply tied into and integrated with the Zionist and the neocon cabal. If you weren't paying attention, Trump announced his vice presidents in Zionsville, Indiana. He could have done it in any other place. He could have done it in Indianapolis. He could have done it in South Bend. I mean, there were so many places in Indiana where he could have done it. But he did it in Zionsville. Clearly, he's making a statement. He's making a statement about who's really in charge. And as a result of picking Pence, just like how JFK was in some ways forced to pick LBJ. LBJ was not his pick. He didn't want LBJ, but they believed that because, that Kennedy had to carry the South, that he needed to have LBJ in office with him. And I think LBJ might have even been a conditional pick from Meyer Lansky, because Meyer Lansky and Sam Giancana were very instrumental in helping JFK get elected. I've talked about this before. Old man Kennedy went to both of them and basically got sign-offs that both mobs would help his son get elected, because old man Kennedy was a mob member. He was he made his money from getting rum from the Bronfman family, who are Canadian crime syndicate family. And they were getting rum from where? South America. Who was bringing it? Aristotle Onassis. They were also getting Canadian whiskey, but it was rum and Canadian whiskey. And probably maybe a little heroin too, because Onassis, being the shipping tycoon, was bringing heroin up as well, which is where we get the connection between Onassis and Jackie Kennedy. And by the way, if you haven't figured it out, JFK Jr. is not John Kennedy's son. And a lot of people, when I talk about this, people get really pissed off at me. Really pissed off. He does not look anything like a Kennedy. Look at his sister. The Kennedys have that jowly look. That is Jackie and Aries' son. That's who JFK Jr. was. I'm getting ahead of myself. But anyway, they had to make a deal. Now Trump had to make his deal. Here we are, we're on the Kennedy timeline. And Trump is part of this weird Kennedy timeline thing. They're both Geminis. They're both dealing with Bushes. JFK dealt with old man Bush because old man Bush was down in Texas, Dealey Plaza. Here we have this whole, Black Lives Matter, assassination, the cop killing, Dallas, coming up again on Trump's watch. Fascinating stuff. Trump has to reach out to basically the power brokers, talk with Kissinger, had conversations with Sheldon Adelson, didn't take Adelson's money. People make a big deal out of it. I'm not sure it's that big a deal. So he brings on Pence, who is so up the ass of the Zionists, it's not even funny. So he brings him on. Okay, so what I'm going to do now, I just set the stage for you, because I think Trump is now primed and poised to become the next president of the United States, unless Obama sticks around. It's either going to be Trump or Obama. In the way that they've played the race card, right? The way that they've played this is that if somehow through more of these events where people get shot, and I saw the video of the guy who's got his hands up and he's on the ground. I don't buy it. I'm sorry. I just don't fucking buy it. Because there's no video of him getting shots. There's a video of pre-shots. There's a video of him in the hospital, but there's no gunfire. It just seems completely contrived. And a lot of these guys that are connected to these shootings are fucking Masons. Like, what's his name? The guy from Louisiana, his uncle is a Mason. Trayvon Martin's father was a Mason. There's a very strong Masonic link here. I think it's coming out of the Prince Hall Lodge. These are Prince Hall Masons. And they're connected to other factions of Freemasonry who are basically kind of reconfiguring our reality. It's part of their destiny. And the Muslim piece comes in very strongly. There's a very strong connection between Islam and Freemasonry. Very strong. Watch the movie The Man Who Would Be King. There's also a book out called The Crescent and the Compass. And it's about the links between radical Islam and Freemasonry. And it's actually a very sympathetic book that links Crowley, Freemasonry, and Islam all together into one occult happy family. I think the guy's name is Anhal Ferrer, if I'm not mistaken. Look it up, The Crescent and the Compass. So we have all these things coming together. They're all kind of merging together. So Trump has his own version of Dallas, right? Just like Kennedy, although he's not there. There's all this weird timeline stuff with Trump and Kennedy, both Geminis. Both have to take on somebody that they probably maybe didn't want to take on. All right, so this is from Henry Mackhouse site, and this is Trump. It's about Trump and these rape allegations. Now, if you go onto InfoWars, you'll see that Alex Jones storms the set of the Young Turks. And I'm not a big Young Turks fan, whatever. I don't give a shit whether he does it or not. But that guy Sank from the Young Turks starts screaming that it's not Bill Clinton who's the rapist, it's Donald Trump who's the rapist. And this is what he's referring to. Now, this is what Henry says. It says, every candidate must have their Panama, said the Protocols of Zion, referring to a scandal in 1888. P no longer stands for Panama, it stands for pedophile. This is why Trump will never prosecute Hillary or investigate 9/11. He likely participated in a pedophile sex ring run by Mossad agent Jeffrey Epstein in the 1990s. Below, Robert Morrow compiles some of the possible blackmail the Illuminati have on the conservatives' Hope and Change 2016. Now, what they're referring to is that there is an island off the coast of South Carolina that Jeffrey Epstein had created kind of an underage brothel with. And Bill Clinton was accused of being on Epstein's plane and having Epstein procure young girls for him. Well, what's bubbling up from beneath the surface is that Trump was a part of it too. So what we have here is like a honeypot. And a honeypot is where, you've got the situation that's created. It's a honey trap to catch people and get them sort of entrenched in an activity that gets them in hot water. So now they've got the dirt on a whole group of people, thinking they can get away with this shit. So here's what Henry says. He says, disclaimer, last night Trump said many things Americans desperately want to hear, especially on jobs, public order, trade, manufacturing, immigration, and regime change. However, there's a big difference between what a politician promises and what he actually delivers, especially if he is controlled like all other members of the Illuminati. Trump parrots Zionism's phony terror narrative that justifies police state measures and increased military expenditures. Yes, he does. I prefer him to Clinton, but compare him to Reagan, who made some changes but left fundamentals intact. Look who Reagan's cabinet was comprised of. Dick Cheney, Don Rumsfeld, all those guys that showed up on young Bush's watch. Henry says, I would like to be wrong. He reminds me of a demagogue or even the dictator Mussolini, who may have also been controlled by Illuminati. Many of his gestures are uncannily the same. So here's what Robert Morrow writes, and it's not a long piece, but I'm going to read it here. The Donald Trump child rape civil case is totally legit. The victim raped at age 13 in 1994 has a witness to Trump's crime. and who used to recruit teen girls for mega pedophile Jeffrey Epstein's parties. More witnesses may come forward. I wrote the Epstein chapter in www.clintonswar.com, and I'm convinced Trump is a violent child rapist. Emily Sugarman interviewed Jane Doe raped by Trump. Now, this is the www.revelist.com/politics. I can't put links in the chat room, but if somebody can go to Henry's site, it is the top story, and you can grab that link and put it in the chat room. Defendant Trump tied plaintiff to a bed, exposed himself to plaintiff, and then proceeded to forcibly rape plaintiff. The suit filed in New York District Court on June 20th, that is Gemini, by the way. During the course of this savage sexual attack, plaintiff loudly pleaded with defendant Trump to stop, but with no effect. The court documents tell the story of a 13-year-old girl hired in 1994 to attend private sex parties in New York City. The parties were said to be hosted by billionaire Jeffrey Epstein, who was convicted in 2008 of soliciting prostitution from underage girls. The suit also claims that Trump attended at least 4 of these parties. At each of these, the suit alleges he initiated sexual contact with the 13-year-old. At one of them, he violently raped her. The plaintiff, using the name Katie Johnson, originally filed the suit in California. Johnson represented herself in that suit, but the judge threw it out for failing to make an adequate civil rights claim. So, HuffPost, Lisa Bloom on Donald Trump rape allegations. Proof comes later at trial, but the November election will come well before any trial. And while Trump is presumed innocent, we are obligated to analyze the case's viability now. He says, I have done that, and the answer is a clear yes. These allegations are credible. They ought not to be ignored. Mainstream media, I'm looking at you. 2 prior women have accused Mr. Trump in court. Documents of actual or attempted sexual assaults. Mr. Trump denies all the allegations. Under oath, Ivana Trump accused Mr. Trump of a violent rape. Mr. Trump, regarding a beauty pageant, he repeatedly propositioned her for sex and groped her, culminating in this frightening alleged incident. So there are more links here. Trump has denied Jane Doe's claims, and his reps have said he barely knew Epstein, even the New York media in the 90s regularly chronicled his comings and goings at Epstein's Upper East Side palace. And even though Epstein had 14 private numbers for Trump and his family in his little black book, meanwhile, Bill and Hillary Clinton have remained mum about their ties to the Palm Beach pedophile, despite evidence that shows Bill was one of the most frequent passengers on Epstein's Lolita Express, and that Epstein donated money to the Clinton Foundation, which is a money laundering scam, even after his conviction. So there's a ton of stuff on Trump. Astrologically, Trump is going to be in big shit later next year, which probably coincides with this trial. Now, if that's the case, because we're going to have a Saturn conjunction on Trump's Saturn and South Node in the 4th house. I'm sorry, Moon and South Node in Sagittarius in the 4th house. That's women, that's legality. The South Node is the Achilles heel, and the 4th house is right at home. He could be tarred and feathered and made impotent, completely impotent as president. If indeed this ever comes to some kind of public forum, there will be scandal like none other you've ever seen in this country surrounding the president. Now, that said, this could clearly be used against him for Trump to do anything that the Ziocons want him to do. And that means further their war agenda, further the security and the surveillance of the police state, which I believe, and I've said this before, that Trump will do. He's already talked about it. He's already talked about how much we need more security, more surveillance, more intelligence. He's broadcasting that. The only thing that Trump has in his chart that I think can somehow turn any of this tide is that he's got the Uranus-Sun conjunction and True Node in Gemini conjunct all, Uranus and the Sun And maybe, just maybe, he's got intel on these other guys, and maybe they play a game of chess behind the scenes. Doesn't excuse him for these allegations of child rape. And we know that people in power are addicted to pedophilia. They get turned on to it because everything else, just straight regular sex, is a complete bore for them. Most of them have been raped as well as children, both men and women. So it's ingrained in their psyche, in their consciousness. Almost all of them have been anally raped. This is breaking Solomon's seal, by the way. And so it is a culture of rape. It is a culture of incest. It is a culture of pedophilia at a high level, and they're all in on it. They've all got the dirty goods on each other. Bottom line, end of story. So it doesn't surprise me at all that this is coming out. So here we go, boys and girls. This is the tempest in the teapot and the maelstrom that has the potential to explode. It's going to be very, very interesting to see what happens should Trump get elected. And I feel like at this point in time he will. If you've got Michael Moore predicting that Trump will get elected, it's almost a done deal now. So get ready. It's either going to be Trump or a third term of Obama. But remember, both sides have stoked the racial fires quite well. So if for some reason this election is too close and they put it into kind of an electoral purgatory and the UN steps in, and remember, keep this in mind, this happened in 2000 with Bush and Gore. How many members of the Supreme Court were there at that time? There were 9. So they could go 5-4. They can't go 5-4 now. They can go 4-4. They could go 5-3 and maybe get a majority. But it's likely going to be 4-4 because I doubt if Obama is going to appoint somebody before the election. And so if we have a deadlocked Supreme Court on an election that's too close, and they keep telling us we're going to have a new election, a new election, a new election, and meanwhile, people are riled up and riled up and riled up, and the racial fires are stoked, and more of these real or bullshit shootings are going on, it could be a very, very long fall. Now, I said that I would get into the chart for election night. The chart for election night is a doozy. We got a T-square going on with Jupiter, Pluto, and Uranus. Jupiter in Libra, we have expansion through balance, right? We want to get to something that's balanced and fair with Jupiter. But what's happening? It's compromised. It's squaring off against Pluto. It's opposing Uranus and Aries. When we get into Uranus, what do we get into? We get into computers. We get into voter fraud, opposing Jupiter and Libra, which wants to be fair. Pluto and Capricorn comes in. You have the plutocrats weighing in, trying to get their ultimate paradigm in place. And what is their ultimate paradigm? It's a paradigm of control. Now, just because, let's just say, for instance, Trump does get elected, all right? Obama is gunning for a national police force. This is what he wants. We've already seen UN vehicles being moved around the South very recently. I have people that have told me that they've seen them on trains. They've seen them parked. So the UN has its ground transportation here already. I believe it's Loretta Lynch that signed some kind of jive-ass referendum with the UN that allows the UN to come in and police Americans. Obama recently, I believe in June, signed an executive order that allows American troops to shoot, fire on, and have aggression, if needed, to enforce the rule of law on fellow Americans. He just signed this into the executive order rule book, playbook recently. You can look it up. Both of these things have happened. So they're moving the chess pieces around to essentially take over the Obama would like to federalize the police force. Every single local police station, department, force, Obama wants to have them all under one umbrella, and it's going to be his. Now, could Trump do that? The answer is yes. Of course he could. And because with Trump, you're dealing with Islamophobia and the Islamic meme, which is very real, by the way. People are being shipped into this country by the thousands. The goal is to have 10,000 more by the end of the year. And I've talked about this on my show. There is this guy, what's his name? The guy from Turkey, Gulem, the guy who's Erdogan's rival. Well, he lives in Pennsylvania, and he's got these schools that he's started all over the United States. There's about 50 of them, quite a few of them here in Texas, one right across the street from my apartment. So it's not quite a madras school, but it's very, very close. So it's kind of almost a slightly secularized version of a madras school. And I have Muslim families moving into my apartment building right and left. My new next door neighbors are Muslim. And they're all here to put their kids through this school and to become, integrated into this community. So I see it happening, and this will be the meme that Donald Trump will use. But it's not just a meme, though. It's very real. It's very real, boys and girls. But what people don't realize and understand is, like, who's behind all of this? Who's in charge of moving these people around? Who's creating this virulent backlash towards Muslims, which I believe, by and large, is a religion of peace. It is a religion of peace. And I know that people will quote the Quran and will say, hey, look, they've got the license to go after Christians or, the non-believers of the Muslim faith. It's one sect of Islam. It is the Salafists and the Wahhabis. These are the Saudis. This is their sect. Right? If you talk to a Sufi, they hate the Sufis, by the way. The Sufis are peace-loving. The Sufis allow for just about anybody else or any other religion to sort of coexist and commingle. They hate the Sufis. They've gone into North Africa. There's a huge Sufi community in North Africa. People that are from places like Senegal. That's where Youssou N'Dour is from. He's a Sufi Muslim. And they go in there and they kill them. They kill them. Because they want them to convert to Wahhabist, Salafist versions of Islam. And the House of Saud comes from Israel. I believe the House of Saud are Edomites. They're not even real, Arabic Semites. It's a whole. This is where the bait and switch, the con and shuffle, comes in. Saudi Arabia has never been Israel's enemy. Never, ever. They've coexisted in tandem for years because Saudi Arabia comes from Israel's bosom. Now, who do you think has just joined the Saudi Arabians in their fight against Yemen? It's Israel. Israel's just jumped on board and decided, hey, we're going to throw down because the Saudis are getting their asses kicked. They're terrible. They're terrible. They're terrible soldiers. They've got really nothing to fight for. And apparently, and this is the case, there's been so much inbreeding inside of their community and group that the guys that are being sent over to be trained for pilots and stuff like that, they're terrible. They have terrible eyesight. They have terrible reflexes. They're not very bright. They're being trained by Americans, and the American, Air Force and the people from the Air Force that are training them constantly comment about how these guys are just not Air Force fighter pilot material. So they're getting their asses kicked. So now the Israelis have to get in. You see where we're going with this? Who is one of the big Islamophobes in this country? It's Pamela Geller, Daniel Pipes. They're all connected to Israel. They're all connected to this hardcore version of Zionism. And this is the trumpet that Trump is sounding. So if you really want to know who's behind kind of what's going on here, who's promoting this version of Islam, and why, all you have to do is look at the relationship between Saudi Arabia and Israel. And that's it. And now we're at this point where it's getting very, very dicey to talk about this stuff. I'm not a big Milo Yiannopoulos guy. I think he's entertaining. I have no idea what his agenda is. He was giving this speech at the Republican National Convention, and he was talking about political correctness. And it all sounded good on some level, but then he was talking about Sandy Hook. And he said, well, we could have prevented Sandy Hook if we weren't so tongue-tied in a politically correct sort of way. Because if we weren't politically correct, we could have talked about how fucked up Adam Lanza was. And that by talking about it, by bringing it out to the open, that he was an antisocial, psychologically and mentally damaged loner, that they could have prevented Sandy Hook. I mean, this is what Milo Yiannopoulos is insinuating. He's wrong, because Adam Lanza doesn't exist. He never existed. Adam Lanza is a cipher. It's his brother. And nobody died in Sandy Hook. And this is why people like Milo Yiannopoulos, or whatever his name is, are dangerous. Because they froth at the mouth and they take up this position that is all about the vox populi. And hey, I'm anti-political correct. I'm about as anti as you get. But then there's this mixing that goes on, and it's like, yeah. And he drops in this thing about Sandy Hook, and it just gets glossed over. And then he talks about Orlando and how if people had known that this guy was really a homophobe and he was a closet queer, and they could have spoke up about it. And he worked for the CIA. Omar Mateen worked for the CIA. It's clear. He was a deep insider. And Orlando was staged. It was a staged event. It was a false flag. Now, you may think that some people died. Maybe some people didn't die. I have no fucking clue. All I know is that club had been closed. Hadn't done anything for business for a while. And then they opened it that night. And they had a drill in Orlando not long before that. I don't know what happened there. Theoretically, a bunch of people died. I have my doubts. Maybe not all of them died. Maybe some of them died. Maybe nobody died. All I know is that there was supposed to be another one of these things, and it was going to happen in California, and that kid spilled the beans. He was part of a plan. This was an inside job, a psychological operation. And when he found out that Omar Mateen got wasted, he freaked out. This is exactly what happened. Here we go. Milo Yiannopoulos glosses right over it. He's banned from Twitter. And boy, is he a bad boy. He's funny. He's outrageous. He talks about, sucking dick and, taking one up his bum, and he loves to, flirt with that and be provocative and get a lot of attention. And hey, I don't care. If that's what he wants to do, fine. If he wants to get attention by being an outrageous and flaming homosexual and being a part of the truth movement, who cares? But when he glosses over something like Sandy Hook and basically blames it on political correctness, and he glosses over Orlando and blames it on political correctness, I begin to wonder. Because he's obviously not a dim bulb. This guy's really bright. really bright. So why would he do that? Why would he do that? But we're having a problem now with, having posts, Twitter, Facebook, Yahoo, Google, which owns WordPress, not the software, but the WordPress sites that you put blogs up on. They've all signed an agreement that they're going to turn people in. They're going to turn people in. They're going to pull posts down. They're going to do whatever it takes. Whatever it takes, that's what they're going to do. So we're living in an era of greater and greater censorship. Greater and greater censorship. Yeller, she's a total fraud. Total fraud. And this is somebody who's in lockstep with Trump. So here we are. This is the reality that we're dealing with. Election night is going to be very intense. I talked about the T-square with Uranus, Pluto, Uranus and Aries. And people have had it. They have had it. And I don't care which faction you're talking about. The straight white American male has fucking had it. The silent conservative has had it. The black community, they've had it. The gay community, everybody's had it. Everybody's pissed off. Everybody's, angry, carrying a grudge, carrying a vendetta. Everybody's got their scapegoats and their sacred cows. And this is the fomentation of the times that we're living in. If, for some reason, Hillary does get elected or Obama continues on as president, you're going to have a group of people, namely the silent majority, the white American male. They will be pissed off, especially if there's some kind of voter hijinks. If for some reason Trump gets elected, you're going to have black America, minorities, and Muslims pissed off. There's no winning here in this situation. None at all. None at all. And on election night, actually election day, we start out with Mars in Capricorn, 29 degrees. And by the time 10 o'clock at night rolls around East Coast time, Mars has moved into Aquarius, 0 degrees. That is rebellion. That is revolution. That is anger on the streets. And we haven't even gotten through September yet. We got a little September surprise ahead of us. So here we are. We come to this part of the show where we ask ourselves, what can we do? How can we change what's happening? Is there any way out of this? Well, yes, there is a way out of it. One of the ways out of it is, first of all, you got to see it. You got to see it for what it is. You got to understand it. And you've got to move through it, move beyond it. Can't let it stick to you. Very important. Talk about it. Let people know. Tell them to come to my show. Wouldn't that be great? Be awesome. The alternative is not going to come from a political place. Never has, never will. The alternative will come from us. It will come from smaller groups, smaller communities, because we can't have massive change. Well, I guess we can, because we're seeing it, but it's not for the better. It's like turning an aircraft carrier around in the ocean. We'll get through this time, and it may be harrowing. We may be put at odds with our brothers and sisters, which is unfortunate. But hopefully, cooler heads prevail, and we understand who and what is behind the charade, and we deal with them. Chances are that that's not going to happen. Chances are that we're going to muddle through this, and it's probably going to get worse before it gets better. But at some point in time, we're going to have to fight for our freedom. It's just the way it is. Now, hopefully, if we don't get too distracted with Trump, that he can basically throw a monkey wrench into the New World Order for a little bit just by the dint of his astrology. Because we know Hillary won't. Hillary will be full steam ahead. Obama, just wherever we are now, just keep going down this path and envision a nationalized police force and Obama as emperor king for the next 20 years. You think I'm kidding? It's very possible. Very, very possible. Remember, these people modeled their government and their vision of government on Stalin and Mao. And Stalin and Mao were in power for a very long time. Extremely long time. So one of the things that you can do personally, and I just want to give voice to this whole idea of living with your passion and living with your creativity and living with your imagination. I think it's important, but it's difficult at times because we're dealing so much with this dominant paradigm that wants to choke us like a kudzu vine. If you've ever been in a relationship with somebody who's really gotten under your skin, and psychologically you can't break from them, and you find yourself thinking about the relationship for a significant period of time, it can be really, really damaging to your ideas about your work, your persona, because you're always processing something that's not quite right, that's not quite a fit. And this is what's happening with reality. It's the same thing. So we've got to find ways when we can unplug for significant amounts of time and dedicate ourselves to something outside of this. Outside of whatever it is we're breaking down and living through and in. I've had really wonderful conversation with Madeline Fernandez, who has her Nemo's project. She's getting ready to put an Indiegogo campaign up. If anybody listens to this and you're living in Florida and you want to help her, that'd be great. She could use some help. She can use some help with videography. She could use some help with her Indiegogo funding. Here's something you can plug into. Have your own version of that. Unplug for a while. Find something that you can do that gets your head out of the ass of the matrix, because it's everywhere now. It's everywhere. It's hard. It is not easy, but we need it. And you can plug back in every now and then and see what's going on. You can listen to my show. I'll do it for you. Go to my website. This is critical. Very critical. We've got to stay in touch and retain our humanity through this. I want to talk a bit about astrology, and I'm going to be really upfront. This is kind of a pitch for astrology, because not only can astrology help you understand where you are in this paradigm with all of the tools and the aspects that are available in your life and in your chart to live in the current paradigm. Astrology also has a higher resonance and a higher octave, that we're living from a quote-unquote spiritual perspective. I mean, to me, it's all spiritual. Don't get me wrong. I think that, taking your trash out is spiritual. Of course, I'm a Virgo. I would think that. But there are these kind of higher octaves, these places where we vibrate at higher levels of interactivity and potentiality. And in my course, I talk about the higher octaves of astrology and coming at astrology from a higher vibratory perspective. That it's not just about, where you're living and, what you're good at in terms of gifts, skills, and abilities, which I think are very important in a physical body, but it's also where your spiritual potential is. So I think that, and I'm making a pitch here, because astrology can be a real guide at a higher octave level. And I'm getting ready to put together what I call, essentially the life reading. And this is a comprehensive 2-hour reading that gets into your chart at a very deep level. It gets into your numerology. It gets into tarot. It puts it all together. I talk about your human design. This is it. If you want the super burrito of readings, this is it. It's a 2-hour reading. I'm getting ready to put this together, and it's going to be a little more expensive than some of the readings that are available on my site. But I guarantee you it is going to be well worth it. Well worth it. It's you and me for 2 hours, and it's comprehensive. Comprehensive. We will not get into transits during this reading. It's a different reading. It's all about potentiality, and it's across the board. It's numerology, it's astrology, it is human design, and it is tarot, and it's all there. Put it all together. I will also talk about the progress chart and where you are right now. 2 hours worth. The life reading. I'm going to have that up on my site, hopefully by the end of the day, if you're interested in that. And also we have the 11th House Academy, and I'm going to put it out there. FAR10, if you're listening to this broadcast right now, you get a 10% discount by going to my website. Go to my website, go through, follow the links, click in to where you purchase the course on Gumroad, and put in FAR10 as a code for discount, and you'll get 10% off. If you're listening to that, you can do that. We're going to have our first webinar coming up here. So I've been waiting just so we can get a few more people on the webinar tip. The first webinar that we're going to have is going to be Saturday. What do we got here? Saturday, the 6th of August. TBD. It's going to happen on Saturday, the 6th of August. The time will be determined because my kid is playing in the World Series, the Pony World Series on that day. It will be at a different time. But block Saturday, the 6th in. So if you're listening to the show and you've already gotten the course, the 6th of August is our first day. The time to be determined. And then I'm going to have the next 11 blocked off. I think what we're going to do is we're going to make this the first, I take that back. We're going to make this after this one, after the 6th of August, we're going to make it the second Saturday of every month. That's easy. The second Saturday of every month. But the first one will be the first Saturday. And after that will be the second Saturday. Are we clear on that? Are we clear? Capiche? All right. Jupiter's in Virgo still and will be until the beginning of September. So get into some self-improvement, learn something, learn a skill. It's helpful, will be helpful. Trust me, we may not be dealing with this version of the world as we know it in 1.5 to 2 years. When Uranus hits Taurus, things change in a very big way. Learn a skill. It's important. Jupiter goes into Libra in September, and it's all about mutuality at that point. Powerful, profound mutuality. Okay, why don't I get out of here? I apologize for last Sunday night. I was going through something real personal, and it was getting very distracting for me to deal with the show. I felt like I was being kind of split in two, and I apologize for that. Won't ever happen again. That's my oath, my word to you, as people that count on me to dispense whatever it is I dispense in bring to the world in your life. And I understand that I've got a role to fulfill here. I'm not talking about from an egotistical perspective. I just need to be solid. Solid for me, solid for you, solid for the rest of us. Because we're, in solidarity, we are together as we awaken from the nightmare of control and illusion and larceny of the last 2,000 years. It's our time. This is our time. We are awakening from the slumber of the Kali Yuga. And let's keep some space for a little more love in our hearts. This is what I'm really trying to learn in my life as well. As I move through all the intense and dark fumes, the vapors of poisonous toxicity which threaten to consume us from the skies above. And with that, let us adjourn. I'll see everybody on Sunday nights for our version of 11th House Radio, clear, controlled, under the right signal and direction. And until then, you know what to do. Use your head to discern what's real, your heart to stay open to what's possible. I'm Robert Phoenix, and this is Philip K. Dick.
We are living in a computer-programmed reality, and the only clue we have to it is when some variable is changed and some alteration in our reality occurs. We would have the overwhelming impression that we were reliving the present, déjà vu, perhaps in precisely the same way, hearing the same words, saying the same words. I submit that these impressions are valid and significant, and I will even say this: such an impression is a clue that at some past time point, a variable was changed, reprogrammed as it were, and that because of this, an alternative world branched off.